Warning. The following podcast contains politics, leftist politics, the whole truth, justice, American way thing. We live in a time where one has to post this. Progress is a dirty word, such as science and reason. My superheroes would weep. This podcast contains naughty language as well.
I'm a sucker for pain. I got the squad tatted on me from my neck to my ankles. The pressure from the man got us all in rebellion. We gon' go to war, yeah, without failure. Do it for the fam, dog.
To DC Domingo, we have another lengthy edition for you. We are going to cover a lot of the trash talking done by Bias Media, in the segments we called Taking Out the Trash. And then the rest of the part, it's going to be me commenting on, DC movies. And then, mostly just covering, aspects of the news relating to, the future of DC movies. So we are going to cover part one, mostly media related issues, taking out the trash. And then it's also going to relate to the Comic-Con movie announcements. With the future of DC Comics as a whole. But we are going to begin our podcast with a comment. And again, like I said on the introduction, if you don't like liberal views, then this channel's probably not for you. And I already have the disclaimer at the intro. Yesterday in Charlottesville, we saw some pretty horrible stuff going on. And, I never, imagined that there would be any kind of argument regarding this. We don't celebrate veterans, from D-Day and say, there were violence on both sides. Both sides are to blame. We don't celebrate the 4th of July and say, yeah, but, the people trying to liberate themselves from the British were a-holes. We don't say those things. So it is quite surprising that, somebody would come out and say that kind of rhetoric when in a incendiary terrorist group, it should be called a terrorist group like the KKK and, white supremacists. I'm not going to get into the whole issue of, white pride versus white power, because that is that's a very lengthy conversation. But there is a difference between being proud of who you are and oppressing. Let's just say that. For instance, we have over here Chris Evans, Mr. Captain America himself. Just putting this out on Twitter. And big kudos to Marvel for not firing him. He's very anti-Trump, among so many people, and it chose this one because it relates to two sides of the coin. Obviously, we're gonna get to Captain America later on because Luc Beson had something to say about Captain America and comic book based movies, so we are gonna get into that. But in this, image of Captain America punching Hitler back in the, in the 40s, in the 40s comics, and late 30s as well. There was a lot of commentary done by Jewish artists in the comics in general. Not just Captain America. There's also Uncle Sam by DC Comics. In Action Comics #1, there was Mr. America, published by DC Comics. So there was a lot of sentiment against fascism, and one of the things that we have is in Captain America here, we have someone who is a proud national icon, who is white, stomping out Hitler, who is a symbolism of white supremacy. So you have someone who is getting punched because he feels superior to others. Captain America obviously is a proud white nationalist, I guess you can say that, but he is not oppressing, African Americans. He's not oppressing Jews. He's not oppressing Native Americans. He's not trying to build a fucking wall. So there are historical connotations to the comics and to U.S. history. It's proud to be an American. You can be proud of that. There's no denying it. You can be proud of being any nationality, any belief system you want, any religion. However, when you cross the threshold into supremacy or, overpowering others, then that's when it becomes, a little bit scary. Think of it like Xavier and Magneto. Xavier believes that, you should be proud to be a mutant. Magneto believes that mutants are above everybody else. So yeah, we have had this kind of dichotomy. For instance, even in our own DC Comics, we've had the biggest one. The most recent one that everybody was really, really shocked was when Superman confronted Zod in Man of Steel. A lot of people are still defending, Alien Hitler, or as I call him, General Zod. And that to me was kind of alarming. When you hate Zack Snyder so much that you align yourself with some fascist general who wants to build new Krypton on top of our bones. That is fucked up. And that kind of tells me that people subscribe to their ideology stronger than they attach themselves to humanity. And when that happens, you've lost credibility as far as I'm concerned, So yeah, you have this horrible tragedy in Charlottesville, and Twitter's still going on about this. I tell people, engage in this at your own will. You will be trolled, you will be hated against on, but it's always good to stand up for what you believe. And, definitely, fascists need to go. I'm sorry. There is no room in the modern world for fascism. There was a giant war about this. They lost. Also, same with Confederates. There's a giant war. They lost. Anyways, so this is the commentary on Charlottesville, and let's get started. I'd like to give out a big shout out to Man of Steel fan Gives Hope. Go ahead and visit his channel. He wanted to know what are my thoughts about the news circulating that Zack Snyder was going to have limited access to the DC Extended Universe, going forth. It's a very interesting, topic, and I think that, my take on is that he was always envisioned to have a role starting the DC Extended Universe. I think that's in part why his wife, Deborah Snyder, became a producer, so that Zack Snyder could eventually go direct other films while their production company would still produce movies. We saw that with like Suicide Squad and I believe Wonder Woman as well. They were still attached to those two projects in some way or another. If it's kind of like the same pathway followed by Nolan, Christopher Nolan and his wife Emma Nolan, who is a very good producer in her own right. They both somewhat contributed to the original Man of Steel, kind of passing down the torch to the Snyders. And, it is kind of this ease of access, that producers usually tend to do that, handing the baton to the next creative team. Because some of these movies take, 3 years to make each. So if you're doing a trilogy, that's almost 10 years out of your life. So it makes sense that, you're kind of, easing out and things like that. One of the things that I always found interesting that the media wasn't really talking about, they're kind of painting this portrait that, because Batman vs. Superman received a backlash by the critics, not by the fans. Us, the fans, freaking loved it. We still do. They seem to portray this picture that because the critics didn't seem to agree with us fans about Batman vs Superman, that Warner Brothers was pushing out Zack Snyder, and that's further from the truth. For instance, if you recall, several months back, actually it was in October 1st, 2015. That's been way long ago. HBO was in preliminary talks to, develop a TV series with Zack Snyder. Also, the co-creator of Lost, David Lindenhoff, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He's also attached to it. So you have a creative force, behind the Watchmen TV shows. Now, I think that in 2015, the seeds of rebirth, DC rebirth, were being envisioned by Jeff Johns in DC, and I think David Lindenhoff, from Lost, and Zack Snyder were tapped to develop this, fully knowing that the Watchmen were going to eventually join the regular DC universe. So what better way to include before Watchmen, the Watchmen graphic novel, and the joining of Watchmen to the DC universe, if not by HBO, because there's a lot of material with before Watchmen that we haven't really covered in the media, because the media doesn't read much what they trash, so I think that people will be pleasantly surprised with the TV show Watchmen that Zack Snyder and Lindenhoff are developing. And I think this is why Zack Snyder is easing out of the DC extended universe, because he's gonna do either producing or directing some episodes to kind of take some time off. And if he wants to come back, possibly after the family tragedy, he can do that. We don't want to burn out these directors, and if these directors have families that they want to tend to, it's better to give them a much more bigger platform, because there are tons of movie directors who are willing to spend decades of their lives, to this franchises. So as far as I'm concerned, that was always the plan for Zack Snyder to, start the DC Extended Universe, and then, other talent would come in. Having Jeff Johns be the go-to man is actually pretty damn interesting. Just because, he interned for Richard Donner, the same way Kevin Feige did for Marvel. So, it makes sense, The only difference is that, with Zack Snyder having such a large footprint on the, origin of DC Extended Universe, he kind of cemented comic book spiritual fidelity, meaning that if you look at, Ben Affleck as Batman, you can tell that there was influence. You can see his costumes right off The Dark Knight Returns, there is that. Whereas if you look at Robert Downey Jr. in Iron Man, that's not the Iron Man costume that we're used to from the early comics, so it's more like the ultimate universe from Marvel. But you don't hear that word a lot, the ultimate universe. These journalists don't know what they're talking about. So, I do believe that the plan was always there for Zack Snyder to kind of ease out of the DC Extended Universe, and perhaps he will, he will return. I know that he was signed on to the sequel, Justice League 2. Perhaps that's going to be his big return. If I had to guess, and if I was a betting man, I would say that Justice League 2 will be about Crisis, and it might actually be 2024. If I'm wrong, because it's 2017, that's a long time. Maybe Crisis will be in 2024, and that'll be the third Justice League film. Perhaps the sequel will be handled by someone else. And, Zack Snyder will return for the Crisis on Infinite Earths 2024. Simply because it was teased on the Flash TV show. I know it's a crazy fan theory of mine, but Trust me, I think the Anti-Monitor will be a bigger threat than Darkseid. So, yeah. So that's my thoughts on Zack Snyder, easing out. Our thoughts are with his family. I don't think he'll listen to this podcast, but, more amazing things have happened. All right, on to the next subject. Another subject matter that was brought to my attention by Man of Steel fan Gibbs Hope was the issue that Thor Ragnarok was getting more online buzz than the Justice League trailer. I think that, there are several things. One, that the most obvious one is that Justice League is coming out in November. We have, a few months, and we've seen Justice League twice, and we already have like 2 giant trailers. And if we recall last year, the Justice League outperformed the Marvel news quite simply because we hadn't seen footage, last year. So that is, one of the reasons, the main one. The other one, which I recall, was quite simply that on Twitter, the official Twitter, was actually promoting Comic-Con with a picture of Thor, So it's almost like, Twitter was already conditioning everybody to promote that. And, the people responsible for that was IGN. They always seem to be gravitating to, the most popular thing, not the best thing. So for instance, if, Nintendo's doing really well, but the Sony fans don't like it, they'll find something to trash talk about Nintendo. Me, I'm an Xbox man, so I really don't care, whatever people think about my choice of console. But, a lot of people are sheep. They're kind of, they don't know better. So, the other thing that I mentioned was that, looking at the new Thor Ragnarok, I think the online buzz was also generated because it looks very similar to Guardians of the Galaxy. I even, some people asked me what I thought about it, and I jokingly said that it looks like Thorians of the Galaxy 2.5. It looks very jokey, not very low-key. It looks more like a parody of itself than anything else. It looks a little bit like Masters of the Universe, but with a budget. And I think that it created that kind of a buzz because Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is still fresh in the public's mind. I don't think very highly of it, but that's beside the point. People seem to still remember it. There's still toys out there, posters out there, so the fact that it looks like another Guardians of the Galaxy serving, it's kind of also, reminiscent of the public's consciousness. They're still fresh in Guardians, so, I wouldn't be surprised to see Groot just dancing, in the middle of a Thor arena, The other thing that they didn't mention a lot was the fact that, the other, franchise, the clown, the scary clown, also was kind of challenging Thor's, online buzz. A lot of media didn't really pick up on this, because how can it be that, a scary clown movie would challenge the MCU's God knows what number this movie is. Like if this was a DC movie that was getting the same kind of buzz as the Scary Clown movie, they'd say like, are DC movies getting tired? It is getting the same amount of buzz as this other movie. Would never say that, So that's the other thing that kind of makes you aware, is that how is it possible that it is getting the same amount of attention as Thor Ragnarok, who, by all probability, should have been getting more buzzed. And the other thing that nobody's really talking about is why didn't Marvel showed their latest trailer, at Comic-Con. Obviously, they're not really faithful to comic book people because they rather show it at their Disney Con or D23. So while DC Comics showcases things for Comic-Con that are fresh and exciting, the competition's doing it at their Disney Con. So you know what? Hey, that's why I choose DC, because they actually show us things at Comic-Con that we're excited about. So yeah, that's my take on it. I think that the consciousness of people are gravitating towards Guardians of the Galaxy kind of sugar that's spilling over to Thor. And it's unfortunate because Planet Hulk looks like it's getting sidelined for, some some kind of comedic Hulk talking about fire. Me fire. My fire's bigger. Sounds like Trump. My crowd fire is bigger. Ooh. Me smash. Me angry. The next topic that it's kind of interesting came out of left field. There's a rumor, unsubstantiated, mind you, that the reshoots were, how do I put this? That somehow Joss Whedon doing reshoots was altering the ending of the Justice League movie, that they were not ending it on a cliffhanger, but rather a solid ending. And, I thought, well, yeah, where did we see this? And many fans on DC Comics Facebook pages pointed out to this article from Forbes about more than a year ago, when they invited all the press to go and visit the Justice League film set. I know that I got angry because David Ferranci was invited, even though he is just a troll who hates DC Comics. But anyways, Forbes had this to say. During the said visit, Deborah Snyder and Charles Roven explained that there was no Part 1 or Part 2 anymore. Side note, notice that Disney copied that formula with Infinity War Part 1 and 2. I know, right? The quote continues as, anymore. For Justice League, which is what the original announcement of release dates said, 1 and 2 parts, because the film now is a self-contained story. Their remarks led to some of the assembled press to interpret this as suggesting the planned follow-up had been cancelled, but director Zack Snyder explained Justice League is indeed a single story without a cliffhanger story continuing into a second half, but that there is still another film with an existing release date, and Justice League sets up the future of the DC universe and the team. So that's the quote. And if you recall, The Dark Knight by Nolan did the exact same thing. They were saving Two-Face for Part 3 of their trilogy. And, they decided to just go ahead and make the best damn film that they possibly could. I like this because there is no filler. A lot of the times when you make a serialized entertainment, you tend to do a lot of filler. There's a lot of he said, she said, instead of just showing us. And the best films tend to be show, not tell. So this is really exciting. That, this was released back in the day. And, some websites nowadays, they don't check. They don't remember things that happened like a year ago. They have this, attention deficit disorder who, it's like, I'm sorry, did someone poison your drink or something? Did you lose neurons by too many alcohol beverages, or did you smoke too much weed, or what happened? Why can't you remember shit? Even if you're a DC fan, you must have read this stuff a year ago. And unfortunately, a lot of these media websites, they don't care. They just regurgitate whatever's posted online. And that's where this rumor is totally kaput. It's dead on arrival. Why? Because they reported on this. Now, as far as somebody mentioning it, there is no source. If you look at Joss Whedon's Twitter page, he just makes fun of these stupid people. Like, oh yeah, everything I do is remaking Zack Snyder. I'm remaking Zack Snyder's entire movie in 2 weeks or something like that. He jokes a lot about that stuff. So yeah, I have this hashtag of no source given, no fucks given. So that's what I like to promote. Truth, justice. You have to be truthful. You can't fall for this clickbait. The other news that we're going to tackle is there's an interview with the actor, what's his name, Morton, who played the designer of Skynet in Terminator 2. He also played Emil Hamilton on Smallville, and now he's playing Silas Stone, father of Victor Stone in the Justice League movie, who helps to create Cyborg. He was interviewed by IGN, and I'm not going to give them any clicks. I hate IGN. And I believe the quote goes as follows. When they ask him about if he heard anything about, the Justice League reshoots and things like that, the actor said that, what I heard was, and that was it. That's all you need to know about the news stories. It's an actor talking about he heard. No source given other than that. There is no examples. There is not an example of, in this particular scene, they changed how Cyborg reacted. None of that. The news was spun into the stratosphere because they said that they were changing the character of Cyborg from a little bit more downer to a little bit more lighthearted, optimistic, and fun. And, without having any kind of examples, we don't know what to make of this, because Cyborg requires a lot of CGI. So a lot of the acting pretty much had to be done ahead of time as far as when he is Cyborg. I chose this picture where he's wearing a jacket because he looks somber. So if they're going to do some kind of, inserts or whatever, you can still have the somber aspect of Victor Stone, but, maybe like, if we continue this scene forward, he moves towards the camera, the insert could be him pausing, maybe like a side shot, him looking down. They can do an insert between father and son, that he had a good memory, and then the shot goes back to him, having like a little smile, and then maybe they can pick up the shot from behind him walking away from the camera. Again, this is a very easy, simple insert that instead of having the shot of him just brooding, it'll give you some pause and some lightheartedness into it. That's how I would approach a reshoot, just like, what are the most optimistic ways and easiest ways to make this character lighter without changing the entire personality trait? Cyborg has also said booyah a few times. That could be something that you can do, insert a couple of booyahs, in the heat of battle, and that would kind of lighten up a few scenes here and there. As far as changing the entirety of the character, I hardly think so, because the actor has already appeared in several large shots, and he requires a lot of CGI work, and again, without giving any specifics, this actor who went on to talk to IGN, of him hurting, it could be anything. It could be a simple scene or not. Maybe it's just one insert to make it lighter. Now, in this channel, we've always said that we don't really care for Marvel. We zero Marvel. We don't really go out of our way to nitpick Marvel movies or talk shit about them. We respond to things that they say and do that is harmful towards us. And most of the time, it's not even them, Marvel itself, but just Marvel fanboys or Marvel media. People who are looking clickbaits, And this article caught my attention. And it goes back to, the Thor Ragnarok, where, the question of why it was outperforming JLA was issued. It's not so much me going out of my way to diminish that, but give context to why that was. Comic Book Resources currently had this article written that Disney might take Marvel Comics off the shelf soon. Now, if I wanted to be a clickbait person about it, I would have blasted this all over Twitter. I would have had it on my personal, Facebook page and all over social media. However, it's just a comment by a website. It's nothing official. It's no news. It's not, the website has the word resource, but this is an opinion. There is no resource for this. The only citation that they have is that, the comic book industry is minimal and that Disney's making more money from the films and merchandise and things like that. And, that is a legitimate issue. But I don't have there's no source on this other than opinion, as far as I'm concerned. And you know what? Why would they do it? It's a lot cheaper to waste money on their creative teams nowadays, because all they have to do is land on the news once a month. Make this character different nationality, make this character different religion, make this character different this. They don't really have to come up with stories anymore. They just have to land on the on the actual news every once in a while. They stopped doing the whole politically correct and justice warrior stuff because people in the alt-right and conservatives got really angry at Marvel. They were not buying their books, and like I mentioned before in other podcasts, it's just basically how you go about it, and it has to do with story, So do I think that Disney will kill off the Marvel comics? They might just go digital, to be quite honest. And they got the idea from DC Comics, because with the New 52, that was the whole point of New 52, is to bring new readers in. And one thing that, many idiots online never say is that DC Comics actually changed and saved comics with the digital, same as digital on the first day. Not because they wanted to kill local stores, they have print issues, but because, people around the world with an iPad and other digital devices can buy comics. That was a big thing. So if Disney wants to kill off Marvel, all they have to do is just, make it digital only. And DC kind of beat them to the punch too, because there's really great digital first issues, like the Injustice comics. They were digital first. Sensational comics featuring Wonder Woman, digital first. So yeah, do I think comic books, are going to be killed off by Disney, with the Marvel brand? Perhaps. Sure, why not? I mean, if they're only a cash cow to them, sure, why not? Now, this kind of brings me to why I've chosen, the DC brand. And, regarding, something on Facebook, regarding how the theatrical cut and the extended cut of Batman vs. Superman relates, I wrote the following. I said that the theatrical cut is like fine dining. If you're a foodie, you tend to savor every complexity and subtlety that the flavors deploy when you eat them. You eat for enjoyment. And if you're a yokel, you sit there kind of bitter and angry because it doesn't have enough saturated fats, sugar, or salts. The extended version of Batman vs. Superman, it's like when the chef comes out and explains to you the same meal you just ate and throws in a few extra appetizers, bitch. So it's the same thing. And I think that's why there's so many idiots talking smack online, because they're used to sugar fed. They're used to their mommy and daddy telling them they're special. They're used to their whole opinion being seen as facts when that's not true. They're used to being cuddled, and they're used to be loud and obnoxious and attention deficit. They can't sit there for more than 10 minutes if there isn't an action scene as required by some Hollywood executives. To further this point, I wrote down that I grew up in pre-internet, and I am my own best fucking critic of my taste. That's how it used to be, and should continue to be. Hell, even publications in print of bad reviews never stopped moviegoers, as it does nowadays, with the uneducated whiny weirdos bitching online. And yes, you used to need a college degree in English and film history to write film reviews. Now you just need a high number of YouTube views, and you've got enough legitimacy. Like taking sex ed from a prostitute instead of a doctor, or to a lesser extent, a sexologist. Neil Druckmann, Grace Randolph, Jeremy Johns, Nostalgia Critic, Ingrid Joe, they can all be easily replaced by a louder, stupider jerk-off, and no one would care, because that's how much their voice is worth. It's only worth its volume, not in its content. And yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's usually how these super YouTubers feel like. They feel like they can dictate their way into the masses. Do as I say, not as I do. I dictate what's cool, you don't. And that's not how it used to be. So, think for yourself and be free. Now, perhaps the most juiciest of clickbait articles, surprisingly enough, didn't get a lot of traction because it didn't have any links attached to it. What does that mean? Well, over here you can see that we got this covered. It's kind of a small website, wants to be the next geek source material. Has this article, early cut of Justice League deemed unwatchable, substantial changes being made. And if you remember, Collider had the same thing about Wonder Woman, and we all know how that turned out. Now, here's the difference, though. The person claiming that Wonder Woman was, trash, they didn't have a source, but they did come out and say, hey, I heard from some of my contacts. So at least they put their foot forward. This website cites the website Batman on Film. However, as you can see here, we're led to believe that, Batman on Film told this website, we've got this covered about it. Kind of like a broken telephone. Like, hey, I heard from this website that. And the only thing they have to cite is the supportive actor playing Cyborg's dad, who they didn't quote directly with this, which kind of like made a lot of people go, well, if you have, this actor and you're interviewing him, why didn't you, quote him directly? Which is kind of like major clickbait. One of the things that was surprising about that is that, as I point out in this, screen cap, usually when there is a link, website's highlighted as it is shown here in the orange bold types that matches the logo for we've got this covered. Notice there's no link to this here. And even if you used to go to batmanonfilm.com and they had nothing on this. So we're led to believe that Batman on Film gave him this particular scoop, and Batman on Film doesn't have the balls to put that scoop there. The quote is, these reshoots, which are still taking place, are not standard pickups and additional photography. Why? Quotation mark or question mark. Apparently, an early cut of the film was deemed unwatchable. Thus, substantial changes of the films were ordered. If it's unwatchable, who the fuck watched it? It's kind of like saying, well, I programmed this really complex computer program, but it's unrunnable. So it needs a lot of work. It's like, well, how do you know if it's not fucking even booting up when you start it up? If you don't boot it up, you're not going to know what the fuck is wrong with it, you know? So an early cut of the film, unwatchable, kind of hard to believe. I brought up some interesting points with this awesome picture of South Park with Captain Hindsight, you know, which usually, you know, if you kind of know what Captain Hindsight, you know, he's a mock superhero from South Park that shows up, you know, like if there's a fire, he just says, well, they should have put more fire escapes, and just flies away. That's his superpower, commenting shit after it happened. So my points are this. One, it would make more sense for this news to be released before the reshoots came out, because not only you'd break the news and everyone would be talking about the reshoots later on, would piggyback on your original post from Batman on Film, meaning that all the times the Batman on Film, you know, told us it had inner sources, or they had an inside scoop, they didn't, you know, pick this up. You know, like when Zack Snyder was prepping this, you know, their inside sources didn't say, well, yeah, you know, early cut of the film sucked, and that's why they're doing this. Absolutely not. So, I mean, this is all like after, you know, the reshoots, which kind of makes you believe it's kind of bullshit. You know, it's kind of like somebody saying, well, you know, the cure for cancer is avocado. And then somebody says like, oh, yeah, I heard something about eating more greens. Yeah, I am a genius. Point number 2. Batman on Film came out with this the exact same day Ben Affleck talked about the two-director system on Justice League and how DC is finally hitting their stride, you know, more confident, greenlighting more projects. It is very, very unusual that the news came out this particular day. Either Batman on Film needs clicks because Ben Affleck's interview is trending and it didn't publish it, you know, so they made up some kind of bullshit in order to get the scoop and, you know, fans attracted to it, or Batman on Film waited until something positive was trending. Neither one would surprise me, you know, because ever since the Nolan trilogy ended, Batman on Film has been a very irrelevant website. So they trash everything DC related while promoting everything DC related. That way they can get the best of both worlds. Classic, you know, clickbait website. Number 3, no source given, no fucks given. That should be a hashtag. Let's make it one. Number 4, a film is a mess before it is a film, because if you know anything about filmmaking, here's what goes into it. You need to process the film, okay? That means, you know, color correction and light, you know, coloration and things like that. You also need the editing, audio, special effects, dialogue correction, multiple microphones, get you multiple sources of audio, so you need to pick the best one. You also have multiple scenes, and sometimes directors like David Fincher splices, you know, actors in the same shot from multiple takes. He also splices different audios this way. It's very complex, so you need a lot of work on that. You know, post-production, lighting and CGI, finished voiceover work. Also, you know, Foley, you know, the ambient sound. You might need to know what the hell is going on, you know, footsteps, you know, train station noises. And also, not the best cut of scenes are usually found. So sometimes they have a scene that they're going to know they're going to reshoot, and the current scene in the editing suite is just a placeholder, you know? So for instance, if we're talking about the Justice League and, you know, Batgirl was not greenlit prior to it, they might have a scene and then, you know, they're going to reference it later on, so you would need a lot of work. Ambient and sound and Foley work. So again, I'm just a humble person who knows how the fuck movies are made, and I'm able to discern all of this. There is no way that a film is, you know, quite complete, you know. And the thing is that they don't really cite when this early cut of, you know, unwatchable film was screened. I mean, shit. I mean, they could have just filmed the first read-through with actors. They could have just filmed some dude with a script, reading off the script. So there really is no source for this. And of course, like, the funniest part is like, well, who watched it? A fucking Jedi with his eyes closed? It's like, oh yeah, I'm sensing some disturbance here. But the other thing that we have to point out is that people who usually make up these kind of accusations don't know shit about filmmaking. For instance, I have more points. Chris Terrio has always intended for the Justice League movie to be lighter in tone. He cited Star Wars, how Batman vs Superman was as dark as, The Empire Strikes Back. This information was on print more than a year ago. Even before Batman vs Superman came out, he went and said this. Neither Warner Brothers or, Jeff Johns has done anything to alter that plan. The plan has already been there, so I don't know what they're talking about. Also, the most important part about reshoots that a lot of these websites don't, mention because they don't know how to make a fucking film, is that Zack Snyder prepped the reshoots prior to his departure. What does that entail exactly? Well, it means that you are doing storyboards. It means that you are doing script and story details. It means that you are including some dialogue from Joss Whedon prior to, passing the baton to him. It also includes notes from Warner Brothers and producers and directors and producers of other, DC movies like Aquaman, Wonder Woman 2, The Batman, Batgirl, and other future projects kind of like Gotham City's Sirens. This includes, notes on how to, maybe put some Easter eggs to set up the future, franchises. Another thing would be like, for instance, the actor playing Cyborg's dad, all he said was, well, I heard. And that's all he said regarding the tone of the Justice League, and that was blown up into sensationalism as like, oh yeah, the early cut of the movie was unwatchable. He told us, off record. Like, that's kind of backstabbing towards the actor and puts him in a really horrible position, and it also, reduces accountability on both websites who publish this stuff. So the other thing is that Ray Fisher, who has a much bigger role than, the actor playing his dad, told us that the reshoots were minimal. So if you're someone with a brain, and I've already explained this, the best way to do lighter tonality with the character of Cyborg is to do it before he becomes, mechatronic, so do a couple of inserts in his football playing days, boom, you're done. But again, this kind of details was not included on any of the websites at all. It's almost like they don't really know how to make a film, Also, the thing is that we DC fans are not downplaying this at all. We know how to make films. I kind of know how to make a podcast. I mean, I could make it sensational and have the comments open so that you guys fight. Have a bunch of xenophobic and, hate words in there as well. It will definitely give me more clicks, but I'm not going to do that. I'm responsible, So we're not like minimizing and we're not like stopping to criticize. It's just that we know how things work. All right, so that's what it is with the whole unwatchable thing. And I think that, sometimes all I got to say is that, trash websites and clickbait bullshit is unwatchable. So please, stop going there, guys. Alrighty, and the last topic of the day is something that I was sent to by a lot of people on Facebook and on Twitter. And usually people, send me good stuff, and I think they wanted to get my particular take on it because I like cinema, I like France, I like comics. So this is a comment made by a French film director regarding the, comic book movies. And, a lot of people were like, kind of like, hey, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And I had to re-record this because when I first recorded it, I sounded like I was sleeping. I think I didn't want to make a lot of noise for people. But whatevs. So this website, Screen Geek, and other ones, this is just one example. I like to not give even a click to big pages that I've talked smack about DC before, just because I'm a rebel. That's how I do it. But anyways, Luc Beson, he is a wonderful filmmaker. He did Leon the Professional, a wonderful film, The Fifth Element, and recently Valerian, The City of a Thousand Planets. In the interview, he's quoted as saying the following regarding comic book movies, by the way. Totally tired of it. Totally. I mean, it was great 10 years ago when we saw the first Spider-Man and Iron Man. Now it's like number 5, 6, 7. There's superheroes working with another superhero, but it's not the same family. I'm lost. But what bothers me the most is that it's always here to show supremacy of America and how they are great. I mean, which country in the world would have the guts to call him Captain Brazil or Captain France? I mean, no one. We would be like so ashamed to say no, we can't do that. They can. They call it Captain America. Laughter. And everybody thinks it's normal, so I'm not here for propaganda. I'm here to tell a story. End of the quote. That was a quote given to Cinepop. It's a cinema magazine online website. This is kind of a potent comment, and let's unpack it. First of all, most of the headlines say Luc Besson bashes superhero films. That's not quite true. He's actually just talking about the Marvel films. Apparently, when someone talks shit about comic book movies, they include all the comic book movies, even DC and all the underground comic book movies, which is kind of unusual. But it's what the stupid reporters tend to do. They don't really have an affinity for reporting. For instance, I don't think Luc Besson deems all superhero movies trash. His fellow filmmaker from France made Blue is the Warmest Color, or I think in France it's called La Vie d'Adèle, which is also based on a comic book movie, and it won the Palme d'Or. Not to mention Persepolis is also from France, a wonderful adaptation of a comic book movie. And, it's interesting that these websites don't point that out. They're not like mentioning good comic book movies. They're just upset that he mentioned their favorites, which is the Marvel ones. The other thing, the comment that kind of strikes me is that, superhero working with another superhero, but it's not the same family. Meaning that, people going to see Spider-Man Homecoming probably were expecting Tobey Maguire, because he's the first person to play it. But all of a sudden, he's a different actor. Or how, there's a Quicksilver in the X-Men movies, but then there's a Quicksilver in the Avengers movies, but it's not the same family. Yeah, so it is pretty confusing, and that has to do with, Marvel and, Sony and Fox just rebooting and rebranding as many characters as they can to make the most amount of money instead of make the most cohesive film saga. I mean, it is kind of evident. I mean, a nice lady who owns a wonderful tea room here in my hometown asked me why Ben Affleck wasn't playing Batman, and I think, again, I'm not even shying away from DC. Like, a lot of the regular people don't pay attention to when film sagas end, and things are picked up from, like, for instance, people still think that Connery is James Bond, even though there's been a whole bunch of James Bond actors. So it's definitely like a message that people in the business industries are making way too many movies, and they're losing sight of telling a story, which is what he tells at the end. Now, as far as propaganda, there was a lot of patriotic characters back in the 40s. If you recall, Action Comics #1 had a similar character called Mr. America, who was battling the forces of the Axis. Also, Uncle Sam from DC Comics was also fighting, bad guys. But those two characters were very full of doubt and not very patriotic later on. They were kind of not very keen on their identity. Even Alex Ross did a graphic, interpretation of Uncle Sam with his famous paintings, and showed kind of like Uncle Sam dealing with like a lot of our dark history here in the United States, as far as Captain America being Captain America. I would ideally change his name to the First Avenger or something like that, which Marvel did when they were marketing the film overseas. So, there is room for improvement, and it is what it is. The only thing that I have to say is that I would love to see comic book, or comic books as a genre, as opposed to something to make money. Right now, one of the reasons why I'm not into Marvel is because they have a parent company called Disney that has, kind of monopolized a lot of the fiction that a lot of people enjoy. And they're kind of grouping it with Star Wars and Pixar, so a lot of people are kind of going, well, that's childish things. I mean, on CNN, somebody called Kim Jong-un a comic book villain. It's kind of like, oh, that's comic book stuff. It's like, well, comics are a little bit more complex than people let on. And I think that Warner Brothers taking the right approach. I mean, I would like to know what, Luc Beson thinks of some of the other Warner Brothers movies. For instance, Watchmen was rated R, almost 4 hours long. Amazing pick. V for Vendetta. I'm pretty sure he would like that one. He seems like a revolutionary. Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks, by Sam Mendes, directed by Sam Mendes. Pretty good stuff. History of Violence, that's also a good one. So yeah, Warner Brothers has a much more respect for movies and a much more respect for comics, which is why, if you look at Unforgiven by Clint Eastwood under Warner Brothers, you're able to do like a really serious, dark Western that, gets you Oscar nominations. I think that's what they're going for with comic books. They're seeing that, spandex, superhero stuff can be a genre. You can have a genre, superheroes are basically the new cowboys. You can have a dark, somber movie like Unforgiven Cowboys. You can have epic westerns like, The Man with No Name trilogy, kind of like the Nolan trilogy. You can have a comedy like Blazing Saddles. You can have a comedy featuring comic books like The Mask. You can also have, goth operas like The Crow by Alex Projas, So, I think that Luc Beson is on point here, and I think the media is kind of blending all the comic book movies together to defend Marvel. But, many cinema, great directors have criticized, the amount of comic book movies taking away, the focus from other ones. I saw Valerian, and I thought it was, pretty damn awesome. It definitely delivered on the visuals of the comic books, and I think I might have seen a couple of comics of Valerian when I was a kid. I don't recall where. I think that they were not even translated. I think they might have been in someone's house in Mexico or in like my next city where I used to live, a big city, for sale, but they were still in French. I don't but I knew, I was aware of them, kind of like the, heavy metal or, comics to 2080 by the British. So yeah, I think that, yes, we are running the risk of saturating the market with too many heroes. I think that, there could be a little bit different interpretations, and yeah, I'm not here for propaganda either. That's why, Civil War, Captain America Civil War was not a civil war. It was just kind of bland. You know your movie sucks when the X-Men 3 was done better, showing, two large of superhero groups fighting it out. And that's a Brett Ratner movie. Anyways, that's all for what I have to say about this. Alright guys, so we are going to split this podcast into two. We're already pushing more than 40 minutes and we haven't really hit our take on the movies. So we are going to leave that for next week. I figured that, I wasn't going to have much to say, but while the making of this podcast, I was engaged in a lot of online, discussions with kids who can't spell the word you. I mean, that should, kind of enlighten everybody, but, we're here to teach. A lot of these people who, demand information is because they're angry that they don't know and they don't want to come off looking like idiots. So it's a you problem if you have any, misinformed, misguided information. Some of these websites are quite douchey, and feel free to spread this awesome meme I created. This meme is brought to you in part by douchey. So, in the next podcast, I will definitely talk about the movie slate. I will compare, their plan to what I announced in my previous podcast as my prediction. And, we're getting some cool news about the CW. I think they won some Teen Choice Awards. I think Supergirl and Flash both won. Those are pretty fun, TV shows, and I will cover those in another podcast. But we had a lot of back catalog to cover, and we were also protesting anti-fascist, so we had a lot of work, and we're probably going to have more work ahead of us. So anyways, super friends, we'll see you later. DC. See you guys next time. Bye.